Welcome in, I'm Artris, and in this video we're going to be going over the cards that you should be drafting for your deck for the OP-11 release event that's happening May 30th through June 5th. In this breakdown, we're going to be going over what you should be doing in order to draft the best cards, what cards from this new set you should include, and maybe some general tips as well. But before we get into the video, if you're new to the channel, please make sure to drop a sub and give the video a thumbs up if it helped you at all. Additionally, if you'd like to talk about the One Piece card game outside of the YouTube comments, please make sure to join the Discord. The link for that is in the description below. If this is your first time going to a release event, most release events, of course this changes per store, most of them are going to be sealed events where they give you 6 packs and you draft a deck of 40 cards out of the 6 packs that you get. So it is very important for you to be able to put the best cards that you get into a deck of 40, so that's why this guide is here. If your release event is a sealed event, most often your local game store will be able to tell you ahead of time whether you can bring your own leader or they will provide you a rainbow Luffy. So of course, which leader should you choose? Let's talk about the most viable leaders that are available for these events. In red, we have the Luffy from Starter Deck 1, Zoro from OP-01, Dragon from OP-07, OP-09 Shanks, and probably the best leader to choose at one of these events, the Sanji from PRB-01. It's an activate main once per turn. Up to one of your cost 8 or lower characters without an on-play effect gains rush until the end of this turn. Of course, this is a very powerful effect where you have a bunch of cards that can immediately swing in with this leader ability, hence why this is probably one of the stronger cards to play at an event. And then onto green, probably the best leader in green to choose is going to be Jewelry Bonnie. When opponent attacks once per turn, you may pay 1 Dawn, rest up to one of your opponent's leaders or characters. Of course, this is going to be a great effect to be able to prevent some bigger attacks coming your way. Eustace Kid from Starter Deck 2 is still a solid option, so it's an activate main once per turn. You may pay 3 Dawn, then trash 1 card from your hand, set this leader as active, so very nice for going for game, being able to guarantee 2 huge hits coming to your opponent's face. On to blue, we have Crocodile from Starter Deck 3. Onto yellow, we have Charlotte Katakuri, probably a good pick for this set because there's a fair amount of Big Mom Pirates support. Dawn times 1, when attacking, look at up to 1 life card from either the top of you or your opponent's life area and put it either on the top or bottom of the life area. Then this leader gains 1,000 power for this battle. So you're able to get some knowledge plus also get some nice Dawn efficiency for only 1 Dawn. Dual color leaders are a little bit harder to run in these sets because they are for life, but some of the better ones to choose from are going to be Yamato from OP-06, it has double attack. We have Nico Robin from OP-09, it has banish. We have Red Yellow Sabo, which this is a very interesting leader that I could see potentially doing well in one of these events. It's from Starter Deck 13. You may add one of your cost 3 or higher characters with 7,000 power or higher to the top of your life face up. Give up to one of your characters plus 2,000 power until the start of your next turn, only for 1 Dawn, so you're able to at least stay alive, plus also buff some of the characters on your side of the field. And then from OP-11, I believe Nami might be the best choice. Of course, Purple Katakuri could be a good choice as well, but if we're looking at all of them overall, I think Nami's effect is pretty solid, being able to do once per turn. On your turn, you may activate this effect when a life card leaves any life area. Draw 1 card if you have 7 or less cards in your hand, so being able to draw off of this effect is very powerful. The other thing here is Dawn times 1 on opponent's attack once per turn. You may trash 1 card from your hand, and this leader gains 2,000 power during this turn. So very tanky, plus also being able to draw cards. Even if it's a 4 life leader, those 2 effects are very powerful, and this could be very strong in a limited setting. And of course, if your store says you can only use the Rainbow Luffy, this card has all 6 colors, and it can be treated as a card with all card names, types, and attributes according to the rules. So a lot of cards that will be type locked to certain things can be used because of this leader. So if you've seen one of my pre-release event guides before, you will know that I like to go by an acronym for the priority of what you should be putting into your deck, and that acronym is GRAPE. And each letter within that acronym is the priority level of what you should be putting into your deck, the G being the game winners or bombs or cards that will win you the game more often than not the moment you put them onto the field. Secondly, we look for removal pieces within the cards that we draft because being able to answer your opponent's field is very important for the flow of tempo, which ultimately will put you ahead over the course of a game. Third on the priority list is advantage, or any kind of cards that will draw you cards further into your deck, maybe see more options, or maybe even deny your opponent of resources. The The P stands for protection. That can be anything from blockers to 2Ks to counter events. Anything that will prolong your death in the game is going to be considered P. And then finally, the E stands for everything else. That can be just generally good cards or maybe vanillas. These cards will be the last things that you should prioritize, but still worth putting into the deck overall. Something to note for OP-11, this set feels very much like Power Creep the set versus at least the previous set in OP-10. There are quite a number of 2K counters and blockers, and then there are a few big bombs in the set as well. I think OP-10 was a little bit light in those regards, whereas OP-9 felt a little bit more like a Power Creep set as well. I feel like every other set we do notice this, and OP-11 would be that set for us. Starting off with G for the game winners, there are a handful of these this time around. Starting off with purple, we have an 8 cost, 8,000 power blocker with Charlotte Katakuri. It says end of your turn, set up to 2 of your Big Mom Pirates type characters with a cost of 3 or more as active, then add up to 1 Dawn card from your Dawn deck and rest it. This is going to be an amazing blocker and also an attacker. It restands itself at the end of the turn, and if you do have any Dawn minusing effects, you then get that Dawn back by the second half of this effect. Next up, we have the 10 cost, 12,000 power Charlotte Linlin. It says if your leader has the type of Big Mom Pirates, this character gains Rush. There's a handful of Big Mom Pirate leaders. Additionally, if you are running the Rainbow Luffy, which a lot of stores are, then this also will be able to get Rush because of that. The second half of this effect only really applies to if you're running the purple Katakuri leader from the set. I don't advise really running that because it's more of a vanilla leader at that point. It's not bad, but overall this character will be a lot better in the Rainbow Luffy version. And of course, the secret rares for the set are going to be bombs. Most are. This is an 8 cost, 8,000 power Rush Monkey D Luffy. It says when attacking, you may trash 1 card from your hand, return up to 1 character with a cost of 4 or less to the owner's hand, then give up to 1 rested Dawn card to your leader or character. This has Rush, removal, and also Dawn efficiency built into it, so what's not to love there? And then finally, to round out our bombs for this set, we have the 8 cost, 9,000 power Kobe. On play, up to 1 of your characters can attack 1 of your opponent's active characters this turn, and then when attacking, you may return 2 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck in any order, give your leader or up to 1 of your characters plus 1,000 power into the end of your opponent's next turn. Both of these effects are very useful, and because they are not locked to any kind of specific archetype, you can use them freely in pretty much any deck. Onto the removal section, we have the 4-cost blocker Doll that says on play you may trash 1 card from your hand. If your leader has the Navy type, give up to 1 of your opponent's characters minus 6,000 power during this turn. So it has blocker built in. Sure, you're having to trash a card in order to get this effect, but because the effect is so powerful, I think that the trade-off is worth it. Of course, this is going to be very useful if you are running the Rainbow Luffy because you will then be having the Navy type as your leader, so that's important to note. Next, we have the 3-cost Nico Robin, Dawn ×2. When attacking, give up to 1 of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power until the end of their next turn. So this effect actually lasts a little bit longer than some of the other minusing effects that we've seen in the game. But more importantly here, it will make trading into bodies a lot easier. So even though this isn't necessarily straight up removal in the traditional sense, you are able to trade into bodies because of the power reduction. Hence, it's kind of like pseudo removal in a way. Along the same lines, Habari kind of falls into that because it's an on play, give up to 1 of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power during this turn. The when attacking clause is less important, but it is worth noting that this character gains 1,000 power during the turn. Then if your leader has the Navy type, up to 1 of your leaders may attack active characters during this turn. It is somewhat a useful effect for that second one. The most important thing here is being able to on play give minus 2,000 power to anything on the field. And then finally in red for removal, we have Honesty Impact, a 6-cost main event. Now normally an event this steep in price is usually not worth running, but it does have a nice effect saying give up to 1 of your opponent's characters minus 4,000 power during this turn, then KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with 6,000 power or less. So you can trade into a rested body and then KO a standing body if it's 6,000 power, or you can get rid of something really tall. The other thing here is it has a trigger, says KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with 6,000 power or less, so you can get that second effect for free if this is in your life. Onto green, we have a 4-cost Lord of the Coast. It's on play, up to 1 of your opponent's rested characters will not become active in your opponent's next refresh phase. So suspending your character by applying a body to the field is very nice. It's once again like pseudo removal because that character you are suspending is not going to be in action for a whole turn cycle. It will still be on the field, but that's your problem to figure out later. Next, we have Fisher Tiger. This is also pseudo removal. The more important thing here, the first half of the effect is not necessarily important. Second half is on play, rest up to 1 of your opponent's characters. So this is a 6-cost rest character. It does have counter, which is nice. So it's a little bit steep for resting, but it does rest anything on the field. So if you are having to go against a pesky 8-cost Katakuri blocker, you can just rest this with Fish or Tiger and then put 4 Dawn on anything and want to swing in for game if that is, of course, the scenario you are facing. But this might more often than not rest something and trade into it otherwise. Speaking of trading into, we have a 6-cost 8,000 power Jimbei. It says on play, if your leader has the Fishman or Merfolk type, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. Then activate main once per turn. Up to one of your Fishman or Merfolk type characters can attack characters the same turn they are played, meaning that this Jimbei can give himself that effect and attack in the same turn that he rests a 5-cost. And then wrapping up green, we have a 1-cost counter or main event. These are very powerful, and we're seeing a lot more of them come into effect after Divine Departure, of course. This 1-cost event says main, you may rest up to one of your Dawn cards. Rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. For only 2 Dawn, you're resting a 5-cost character or less than that, which is really nice. Great efficiency there, being able to just bypass a blocker if you're needing to go for game. Of course, this also has the defensive capability, which we'll get into a little bit later. We have the 6-cost Sanji in blue. This is going to be probably one of the worst options for removal, just because of the fact that the on play is return up to one character with an original power 5,000 or less to the owner's hand, so you're bouncing something back to the opponent's hand, and it has to be a base or original power rather of 5,000. So that's not going to hit a lot of taller characters that you might find to be a threat. This could be a good tempo swing, of course, depending on the state of the game. The downside here, of course, is that it has to be an original power, and on top of that, this card does not have counter. Blue also has a 3-cost main event called Gum Gum Jet Culverin that is return up to one of your opponent's characters with the original cost of 4 or less to the bottom of their deck. This is like a slightly cheaper, slightly worse 3,000 worlds, but overall still worth putting into the deck at maybe a 1 of. Probably the best removal from this set comes in the form of a 2k counter in Zeus from yellow. It's a 2-cost, 2,000 power body that says on play you may add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life cards to your hand. KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. I think that it's important to note that the card that you're taking goes to your hand, as opposed to a lot of the previous effects where you are having to KO something on the field, you're having to trash the life. This instead goes to your hand, so it's kind of a card advantage piece, plus also 2k counter, plus also removal. So this is going to be one of the more powerful cards to come out of the set. Then we have Gum Gum Red Hawk, a 1-cost event that says main, you may rest 3 Dawn cards. If both players' total amount of life cards is 5 or more, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with an original cost of 5 or less. It also has a counter event option that says up to one of your leaders gains plus 3,000 power during this battle. So the flexibility here is very nice, very similar to the other card that we just saw earlier in green, being able to have a couple of options for flexibility, whether it's removal or defense. Overall, a very worthwhile card to put in. And then finally, for the removal, we have a 6-cost event that says add up to 1 character with a cost of 6 or less face up to the top or bottom of owner's life area. I don't necessarily think this is really worth running, even at a 1 of, but it is worth noting that you could put this in if you are desperate to put some cards into the deck. It does allow you to heal yourself, but it also allows you to remove an opponent's character as well. On to the A for advantage. These are cards that will either draw you cards, filter cards, give you some knowledge, or maybe even deny resources. I will say that compared to previous sets, it feels like the card draw in this specific set is rather sad. So the cards you're about to see are probably some of the worst I've seen in a while for card advantage, but we'll go over why they belong here anyway. Starting off, we have Carrot in blue, a 1-cost character that says on play, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, place them at the top or bottom of your deck in any order, and then on the opponent's attack, you may trash this character, give up to one of your leaders plus 1,000 power during this battle. So the flexibility here, being able to get additional value off of after the fact it's being played, is very nice, because you can look at this as a 1k counter that you just put onto the field, because then you can use it later defensively. The important part for the advantage, of course, is being able to look at the top 3 cards and either keep them there or put them to the bottom, so that knowledge, I think, is worth putting this into your deck if you do see it in your pile. One of the best cards to come out of this set, in my opinion, is the 5-cost Blocker Nami. This says on play, if your leader is multicolored, draw 3 cards and place 2 cards from your hand at the top or bottom of your deck in any order. So this will allow you to draw, this will allow you to stack, this will also allow you to filter. This does everything you're wanting it to do for advantage. You do have to make sure your leader is multicolored for this to work. If you're running Rainbow Luffy, of course, this definitely works. So very strong card in that scenario. But this is probably one of the best pieces we've seen in quite some time. And honestly, it's like the only card draw that you'll see in this set. Because there's not a lot of cards to talk about for advantage, I do want to try to put Gear 2 into this because it will get you an advantage in the form of ramping. So this will allow you to either be defensive, of course, or use the effect for main, resting 2 of your Dawn cards. And if your leader is blue, add 1 Dawn card from your Dawn deck and rest it. So as you can see, Rainbow Luffy is eating good this set, if that's the case. I think that Gear 2 traditionally is not going to be a card I would consider advantage, but because of the lack of them in this set, ramping up a little bit faster isn't a problem overall. In black, we have Helmeppo. The important thing here is that Helmeppo on play, you can trash a card from your hand and then draw 1 card and then play up to 1 sword. So you don't have to play a sword if you don't have one in hand. I think the trashing 1, drawing 1 is probably the best effect for this card. There's a few other cards within yellow that I believe hit if you are the Shirahoshi leader, which I believe will work for the Rainbow Luffy. I'm not entirely sure. I know that Rainbow Luffy says it takes on all card names. If that means leader card names, then a lot of the Shirahoshi support has card draw in it, so just keep that in mind. I don't want to put that in here and lead anybody astray just in case, but something to note before we go on to the next section. On to protection. This is going to be anything within the 2K realm, blockers, or counter events that keep you alive. There are a total of 18 blockers in this set, which is an astronomical amount compared to previous sets. Instead of going over all 18 blockers, I'm just going to list out probably the most notable ones to at least keep an eye out for if you do come across them. Of course, we talked about Doll, which will allow you to reduce the power of something on your opponent's side of the field. There is Borsalino that says activate main, you may rest this character. Up to 1 of your Navy type leaders or characters can attack active characters during this turn. So if you're running Rainbow Luffy, this effect will take place and you can attack an active character. So kind of like pseudo removal. Of course, Nami, as I mentioned in the advantage section, an amazing blocker, just being able to draw cards, stack your deck, filter your hand, whatever you need in a pinch. Also in blue, we have a 5-cost, 7,000 power Luffy that says if you have 5 or more cards in your hand, this character cannot attack, but it does have blocker, which is very nice, and a 1k counter, so a nice little vanilla stat line, plus also blocker built in. We talked about Katakuri in the bomb section, but this will probably be the deciding factor in a lot of matches going into the OP-11 release event. If this card hits the field, it's more than likely just staying there for the rest of the game, which is going to be a very big nuisance for your opponent to have to try to bypass. This thing attacks and then restands itself, so love this card. Of course, it is going to be a card you're going to want to try to get, and if you can get it on the field, you will likely, more than likely, win your games. Another notable blocker, but this one is in black, is the 4-cost Shu. Once per turn when your opponent's character attacks, you may activate this effect. If that character has the slash attribute, this character gains plus 5,000 power during this battle. This is a very interesting stipulation, but worth noting that you could end up having a 10,000 power blocker depending on the attribute of the attacking character. And then in yellow, we have a beige blocker that says once per turn, if you have a supernova type character other than this beige that would be removed from the field by your opponent's effect, you may add that character to the top of your life cards face down instead. Now, this effect might not take place very often or at all, but it is a cheap blocker that has a 1k counter on the side, so worth noting, and the effect is an additional nice bonus to add in there. But those are just 7 blockers. There's a lot more in the set. If you see blockers, they're probably worth putting into your deck, so keep that in mind. Also worth putting into your deck are going to be 2k counters. Now, there are 26 2k counters in total, quite a lot compared to previous sets. And so as a result, I'm just going to show you a few that I think are going to be the best utility 2ks. We have Frankie in red, a 4-cost, 4,000 power body that says your turn once per turn. When your opponent activates an event this turn, all of your characters gain plus 2,000 power during this turn. So if you were trying to push for lethal, or maybe you're just trying to pressure your opponent and they want to use a counter event, then all of your characters get a buff if they decide to use that counter event. We have Little Sadie that says Dawn -1 on play. If your leader has the Impel Down type, rest up to 1 of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. I didn't mention this in the removal, so this actually can count as a pseudo removal. And if you are running Rainbow Luffy, of course, you have the Impel Down type, so then this effect will be able to take place. Otherwise, it's a solid 2k counter. And then, of course, Zeus, we talked about that 2k counter, which will allow you to KO an opponent's character with a cost of 5 or less. So this is the best utility 2k we've seen in a while. If you can add this to your deck, go for it. It's a rare, so it's going to be harder to find, but of course, that doesn't mean it's impossible to find. And then on to the protection events. There are some more events, as I mentioned, that are very similar to Divine Departure, where they have a main or a counter. Of course, we talked about the Gum Gum Elephant Gatling. This is a 1 cost where you can actually pay 1 on main to rest a 5 cost, but if you want to on defense, you can use this as a counter event to give your leader plus 3,000 power during the battle. Important to note that all of these that have the flexibility there will protect a leader as opposed to a character, so don't think that you can protect a character with these events. It's only if your opponent is swinging face. Next up, we have Vagabond Drill, a 1-cost counter event that says up to one of your leader or character cards with the Fishman or Merfolk type gains 3,000 power during this battle, then rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. This is going to be useful in the Rainbow Luffy deck, of course, and then the second part of that being able to rest a character could be a blocker that you rest, so that's also a nice add-on. We have Gum Gum King Cobra in blue, a counter event that says up to one of your leader or character cards gains plus 2,000 power during this battle. Then if you have 4 or less cards in hand, that character gains plus 2,000 power for this battle. Of course, you don't want to go down that low in hand size, but sometimes towards the end of the game, you will be at a low hand total, so that is useful to have that 1 cost plus 4,000. We talked about Gear 2 being able to ramp for the main, but the counter event, of course, is plus 3,000 to your leader during the battle. And then Gum Gum Red Hawk, this is a 1-cost main, rest 3 Dawn, and then KO up to one of your opponent's characters with the original cost of 5 or less if both players' total amount of life cards is 5 or more. So that's very useful. And then the counter event, up to one of your leaders gains plus 3,000 power during this battle. And then onto the E for everything else. Once you've already put everything from the G, R, A, and the P sections into your deck, these cards will be the cards that you're going to want to put into your deck when you're finalizing. These cards may not necessarily have amazing effects or stat lines, but they are still potentially worth putting in based off of how desperate you might actually be. Starting off, we have a 5-cost, 6,000 power Zoro. It says activate main once per turn. Give up to 1 rested Dawn card to your leader or one of your characters. This is actually an amazing card that is better statted than you would anticipate for a card of this caliber. So if you can add these in, please do. It's an uncommon, so you might come across it every now and then, but it is going to be a little bit harder to find. And then we have the 7-cost, 7,000 power Arlong. If your leader has the Fishman type and you have 3 or less life cards in your life area, and your opponent has 5 or more rested cards on their field, this card gains -3 cost while in hand, and the trigger is rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. Has a 1k counter, so the stat line for 7 for 7 is not awful, but of course, if you can get this effect off, a 4-cost, 7,000 power body is very nice. It is a weird stipulation, I understand, but you might be able to pull this off, and it could be worth running. And then finally, we always are going to try to include the vanillas for the set. These are going to be your 3-5, your 4-6, your 5-7, your 6-8 stat lines. All of these are going to be counters, and with those stat lines, and then have no effect. As you can see, we have the vanillas for the set on screen. We also have a few new introductions as far as like quote-unquote vanillas go. There's a lot of 2Ks that are introduced into the set that have a 5-cost, 6,000 power or 6-cost, 7,000 power stat line, which is not necessarily as strong as the vanillas that you see on screen. However, you might want to actually consider putting those onto the field instead of having them just for the 2K because of the fact that they do have decent stat lines overall. Well, that about wraps it up for the best cards to get for the OP-11 release event. Hopefully this video helped you in some capacity. Please let me know in the comments below how you guys do at your release events. Did you pull anything good? Let me know as well. I'm always curious to hear what the community is opening up and how they're doing. But anyways, as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.